Hello, and welcome. Before we begin, I want to warn you that the stories you're about to hear are based on real events, real people, and true crimes that shocked communities and left lasting scars. Everything you hear tonight is drawn from facts, court records, and news reports. If you are easily disturbed, please consider listening with caution. For those of you who are still here, I want to ask, where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. And if you like content like this, make sure to subscribe, so you never miss a story that chills you to the bone. We begin in a quiet suburban town. On the surface, it seemed peaceful, children playing in yards, neighbors exchanging polite greetings, the occasional dog barking. But behind one particular house, a darkness had been festering for years. The residents were unaware of the man living there, a man who had spent months carefully documenting the movements of people in his neighborhood, memorizing their routines, the times they left for work, when they returned. No one suspected that behind his friendly smile and waving hand, he was plotting. One evening, a young woman walking her dog noticed a strange vehicle parked along the street. It had no plates, and the driver seemed to be watching the houses intently. She dismissed it at first, telling herself she was being paranoid, but a feeling of unease gnawed at her. That feeling turned out to be justified. Over the following weeks, police would uncover items hidden in the man's home, items belonging to people who had vanished without a trace. Jewelry, personal belongings, even clothing. It became clear that the man had been abducting his victims, holding them in a secret room he had built behind a false wall. He was arrested after a neighbor reported suspicious sounds, and what authorities found inside was unimaginable, evidence of crimes that had remained unsolved for years. Moving across the country, another case unfolded in a rural area, where the forested roads are quiet and the nights are darker than anywhere else. A family had moved into an isolated farmhouse, unaware that the previous tenant had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Locals whispered about strange noises in the night, doors creaking open when no one was home, lights flickering in patterns that couldn't be explained. One night, a teenage girl woke to the sound of footsteps in the hall. At first, she thought it was her parents, but the footsteps stopped at her door. A shadow passed across her window. She froze, unable to breathe, as someone quietly knocked, then disappeared. Authorities later found that the previous tenant had been a serial intruder, targeting families who had recently moved into rural homes. He had recorded everything, every movement, every conversation, before he struck. His collection of photographs and video footage was extensive, and police were horrified at the calculated nature of his crimes. He didn't just commit crimes, he orchestrated fear. The most chilling detail was that he had visited homes without ever being seen, slipping in and out, leaving families unaware of how close the danger had been. Not far from there, a city case tells of a man who seemed harmless, even charitable. He volunteered at soup kitchens, attended local events, and smiled easily at strangers. But behind closed doors, he kept a journal detailing plans that were meticulous and disturbing. He had studied law enforcement protocols, noting when officers were least likely to patrol certain neighborhoods. Over several years, he committed a string of burglaries that escalated into violent crimes. His first victims were chosen at random, but over time, he targeted people he considered vulnerable, documenting each crime with cold precision. What ultimately led to his arrest was not a slip in planning but a single detail. One victim had managed to leave a hidden message in their home. When authorities discovered it, it revealed patterns that connected the dots across multiple cases. Then there's the story of a traveling salesman in the 1980s, a man who crisscrossed the country, charming everyone he met. He had a knack for blending into any environment, earning trust almost instantly. But in every town he visited, people began to disappear. Women, primarily, vanishing without a trace. His arrest came only after decades of investigations, after a retired detective noticed similarities between unsolved cases in different states. He had been meticulous, erasing almost every clue, relying on the transient nature of his work to stay unnoticed. What investigators discovered was chilling: notebooks filled with coded records, locations marked on maps, dates of travel, all pointing to a methodical pattern of abduction and murder that spanned the nation. As we explore these stories, it's important to remember that the people involved were real, and the victims' lives mattered. Their fear, pain, and suffering were genuine. And yet, there's a strange fascination we feel when confronted with evil that hides behind ordinary faces. The man next door, the friendly volunteer, the charming traveler, anyone could be harboring secrets unimaginable. Another case takes us to a small coastal town. A fisherman was found dead in his boat one morning. At first, it seemed like a tragic accident, an unfortunate mishap at sea. But detectives noticed subtle signs. The ropes tied in an unusual way, a small piece of cloth that didn't belong to the victim, and a trail leading back to a warehouse along the docks. Inside, investigators found evidence of a criminal operation that had remained undetected for years. The perpetrator had been using the guise of fishing and shipping to cover illegal activities, including smuggling and kidnapping. The discovery shocked the town. People realized that danger had been lurking under the guise of normalcy for years, hidden behind the rhythm of everyday life. And then there is the unsettling story of a neighbor who noticed the smell first. It was faint at first, almost dismissible, but it lingered in the hallways, growing stronger day by day. The apartment next door was abandoned, or so it seemed. When authorities were finally called, they found a scene that defied understanding. The perpetrator had been keeping victims confined in the apartment, sustaining them just enough to prevent escape or death while inflicting psychological torment. Letters, recordings, and photographs documented months of abuse. The most chilling aspect was the meticulous care the criminal had taken to avoid detection. Soundproofing, careful disposal of evidence, and calculated timing of movements, so neighbors never suspected a thing. Sometimes, true crime is terrifying not because of the acts themselves, but because of the planning, the patience, and the cold rationality behind them. Each of these cases reveals a disturbing pattern. The most dangerous people often appear ordinary. They live among us, smiling, nodding, participating in communities, while hiding a reality too dark to imagine. In another haunting story, a young couple rented a cabin in the mountains for a weekend getaway. They arrived to serene surroundings, expecting nothing but quiet and solitude. But the first night, they noticed a car parked far down the dirt road, headlights off, engine running. Assuming it was another visitor, they tried to ignore it. The second night, the car returned. This time, there was a figure standing near the edge of the woods, watching. Panicked, they left early the next morning. Got it? Completely new story, shorter by tilde 500 words, written directly in chat. No code box, no titles, smooth TTS flow, intro plus engagement included. Here you go. Hello, and welcome. Before we begin, I want you to know that the stories you're about to hear are based on real crimes involving real people. Names and certain identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are true, drawn from police investigations, court records, and documented cases. These are not fictional stories. If disturbing content affects you, now would be a good time to stop listening. For those staying with me, get comfortable. Let your eyes rest. And while you're listening, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. I always like to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoy true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and it lets me keep bringing you stories like this. The first story takes place in a small town where nothing ever seemed to happen. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and waved to strangers without thinking twice. A man lived there for nearly 10 years without ever drawing attention to himself. He worked a normal job, paid his bills on time, and never caused trouble. What no one knew was that he spent his nights walking the streets, memorizing routines. Which lights went off at what time? Which houses were empty? Which people lived alone? When he was finally arrested, police found detailed notes inside his home. Floor plans drawn from memory. Lists of addresses. Times written beside names. Some of those names belonged to people who had been missing for years. The town would later learn that several cold cases, long assumed to be unrelated, were all connected to the same quiet man they passed on the sidewalk every day. Another case begins in a large city apartment complex where neighbors rarely spoke. A woman reported hearing noises through the walls late at night. At first, she assumed it was music or a television. But over time, the sounds became more unsettling. Crying. Muffled voices. Something heavy being dragged across the floor. Each time she called security, nothing was found. It wasn't until months later, after a strange smell began to spread through the hallway, that police forced their way into the apartment. Inside, they discovered a carefully hidden room. The walls had been reinforced to block sound. Inside that room was evidence of prolonged captivity. The person responsible had lived among hundreds of residents, riding the elevator with them, making small talk, all while committing crimes just a few feet away. In another disturbing case, a man who traveled for work became the focus of a multi-state investigation. 4 years, disappearances had occurred near highways, rest stops, and small motels. No pattern was found until one investigator noticed that the dates aligned with a single individual's travel schedule. When authorities searched his vehicle, they found tools, restraints, and notebooks filled with coded entries. Each entry corresponded to a victim, reduced to numbers and symbols. Perhaps the most unsettling story comes from a rural area where homes are miles apart. A family began noticing small things out of place. Footprints near their windows. Objects moved slightly from where they had been left. At night, they heard someone walking around their house. They assumed it was animals. One night, a motion light revealed a man standing in their yard, watching the house in silence. He fled before police arrived. Months later, he was arrested for breaking into homes and watching families sleep, sometimes for hours at a time, without ever being noticed. These cases are disturbing not just because of the crimes themselves, but because of how ordinary the perpetrators appeared. They blended in. They lived normal lives. They were trusted, ignored, or overlooked. True crime reminds us that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles. And sometimes it lives right next door. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories told quietly, slowly, and based on real events. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that what you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Some details have been changed to protect identities, but these events truly happened. These stories are not meant to shock, but to quietly reveal the darker sides of real life. If this kind of content isn't for you, it's okay to step away now. For everyone else, settle in. Let your breathing slow. And as always, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how many places these stories reach. If you find yourself coming back for more true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe. It helps more than you know. This story begins with a missing person report that didn't seem urgent at first. A middle-aged man failed to show up for work. He lived alone, didn't have close family, and was known to take spontaneous trips. His employer waited 3 days before calling police. When officers entered his home, nothing appeared wrong. His wallet was gone. His car was missing. There were no signs of a struggle. The case was quietly filed as a voluntary disappearance. Weeks later, another person vanished. Then another. All lived alone. All had routine lives. All disappeared without signs of violence. The cases were handled separately, spread across neighboring towns, and no one connected them at first. The connection emerged by accident. A patrol officer noticed that each missing person had recently visited the same self-storage facility. At first, it seemed like coincidence. But when detectives pulled security footage, they noticed the same employee helping each of them. He was polite, helpful, and forgettable. He helped them choose unit sizes, explain payment plans, and walked them down narrow hallways lined with metal doors. When questioned, the employee cooperated fully. He answered calmly. He even joked with investigators. He said he saw hundreds of customers every month and barely remembered any of them. But investigators noticed something odd. His access logs showed he entered the facility late at night, often long after closing hours. A warrant was obtained to search the facility. Most units were filled with ordinary items, furniture, boxes, old clothes. But one unit stood out. It was paid for in cash. Always on time. No name on the account. Inside, police found plastic sheeting, restraints, and personal belongings linked to multiple missing people. The employee was arrested that same night. During interrogation, he revealed a routine that had gone unnoticed for years. He targeted people with no close family, no one likely to raise immediate alarm. He used his job to gain trust. Once inside the storage facility after hours, there were no witnesses. No cameras in certain corridors. No sounds that could escape the reinforced walls. What disturbed investigators most was not just the crimes, but how long it went undetected. Customers walked past the unit every day, unaware of what had happened inside. The building sat beside a busy road, surrounded by normal life. Another case takes us to a quiet retirement community. An elderly woman reported receiving phone calls late at night. No one spoke on the other end. Just breathing. Police advised her to block the number. Weeks later, she was found deceased in her home. At first, it appeared to be natural causes, but an autopsy revealed otherwise. Investigators traced the calls to a man who worked as a home maintenance contractor in the area. He had keys to dozens of homes. He knew schedules. He knew who lived alone. Over time, police uncovered a pattern of surveillance and psychological torment before his crimes. He didn't rush. He observed. He waited. Perhaps the most unsettling case comes from a college campus where students felt safe walking at night. A series of assaults occurred in dormitories with no signs of forced entry. Doors were locked. Windows intact. Panic spread as students realized someone had access. The perpetrator turned out to be a former campus employee who had kept a master key after being dismissed. 4 months, he moved freely through buildings after midnight. He blended into the environment so well that several victims recalled seeing him earlier that day and feeling no fear. In each of these cases, the common thread is access, trust, familiarity. The crimes didn't happen in dark alleys or abandoned places. They happened where people felt secure, where they assumed nothing bad could happen. True crime teaches us that danger often hides behind normal routines, ordinary jobs, familiar faces. And while these stories are disturbing, they're also reminders to stay aware, to trust discomfort, and to question what feels slightly off. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more real true crime stories told calmly, quietly, and without distraction. Sleep well tonight, and stay safe. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that what you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Some identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are true and drawn from documented cases. These stories are meant to be listened to slowly, quietly, and with care. If this kind of content isn't for you, it's okay to stop here. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let the noise of the day fade away. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins with a house that no one wanted. It sat on the edge of a small town, empty for years, even as the housing market grew tighter. Each time someone moved in, they moved out within months. Neighbors said the house felt wrong. Doors would be found unlocked. Lights turned on by themselves. People heard footsteps on the stairs late at night, even when no one else was home. Eventually, a young couple purchased the house, dismissing the rumors as superstition. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. Then small things began to happen. Items disappeared and reappeared in different rooms. The couple heard soft noises in the walls, like breathing or shuffling. They assumed it was animals. One night, the woman woke up and realized someone was standing at the foot of the bed. She couldn't see a face, only a shape. When she screamed, the figure fled. Police searched the house and found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No explanation. Days later, the man noticed something odd in the basement. A section of wall sounded hollow when tapped. Behind it, police discovered a narrow crawl space that led to a hidden room. Inside were blankets, food wrappers, bottles of water, and notebooks filled with observations. The writer had been living inside the house, unnoticed, for months. He documented the couple's schedules, conversations, and sleeping habits in disturbing detail. The intruder was arrested weeks later. He had been entering homes through crawl spaces and attic vents, living inside them without the occupants' knowledge. Investigators linked him to multiple cases across the state. Families had unknowingly shared their homes with a stranger, sometimes for years. Another case comes from a hospital where patients began reporting strange encounters late at night. People claimed a staff member checked on them, adjusted their fours, and spoke softly. The problem was that no such staff member was scheduled. Security footage later revealed a man wearing scrubs, moving confidently through restricted areas. He wasn't an employee. He had stolen a uniform and memorized routines. When arrested, authorities found he had targeted vulnerable patients, exploiting their weakened state. He blended in perfectly. No one questioned him because he looked like he belonged. In a different city, a string of disappearances puzzled investigators. All the victims had used the same rideshare service shortly before vanishing. Data eventually revealed a driver who had deactivated his GPS during certain trips. His car was found to contain personal belongings from multiple missing people. He had taken advantage of trust and convenience, turning something familiar into something dangerous. The final case in this story involves a man who volunteered at a community center. He taught classes, helped with events, and was known by name. Over time, he gained access to private spaces, storage rooms, and offices. When a fire broke out in the building, investigators discovered evidence of crimes hidden in areas only volunteers could reach. The man had used his position to commit acts that went unnoticed for years. What makes these cases disturbing isn't just what happened, but how close it all was. Inside homes. Inside hospitals. Inside places meant to be safe. The perpetrators didn't force their way in. They were already there. True crime shows us that danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks helpful. Sometimes it looks ordinary. And sometimes it lives quietly in the background of daily life. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to gently remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Some details have been altered to protect identities, but the events themselves are true and documented. This is meant to be listened to slowly and calmly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, settle in. Let your breathing slow. And as you listen, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future stories. This story begins with a disappearance that no one noticed right away. A woman in her early 30s lived alone in a busy city. She worked from home, rarely socialized, and had no close family nearby. When she stopped responding to emails, her clients assumed she was taking time off. Days passed. Then weeks. When police finally entered her apartment, they found it clean and orderly. Her phone was gone. Her keys were missing. There were no signs of a struggle. Neighbors reported nothing unusual. The case quickly went cold, labeled as an adult who left voluntarily. Months later, another woman vanished under similar circumstances. Same age range. Same lifestyle. Same city. Again, no witnesses. No signs of violence. Investigators didn't connect the cases until a building manager mentioned something strange. Both women had recently requested maintenance work. The maintenance worker was cooperative when questioned. He had worked in dozens of buildings across the city. He had keys, access codes, and knowledge of residents' schedules. At first, nothing tied him directly to the disappearances. But detectives noticed that his work orders aligned perfectly with the days the women were last seen. A search of his storage unit revealed personal items belonging to multiple missing women. Jewelry, identification cards, phones, everything carefully organized and labeled. He had kept records of which buildings he worked in, which apartments belonged to people who lived alone, and which residents rarely had visitors. In another case, a quiet suburban street was shaken when a teenage boy went missing after a late-night walk. He was last seen heading toward a park he visited often. Weeks later, police discovered a hidden structure in a wooded area nearby. Inside were signs that someone had been living there for a long time. Maps of the neighborhood. Notes describing people's routines. The boy had been targeted simply because he was predictable. Another disturbing case comes from a long-term care facility where several residents died under mysterious circumstances. At first, it was assumed to be natural causes. But a nurse noticed inconsistencies in medication records. A deeper investigation revealed that a staff member had been administering incorrect dosages, carefully choosing patients who had no close relatives to question their deaths. He had worked there for years without suspicion. The final case in this story involves a man who posed as a delivery driver. He wore a uniform, carried packages, and knocked confidently on doors. Most people didn't think twice before opening them. Over time, reports of break-ins and assaults began to surface. Witnesses described a man who looked completely legitimate. It wasn't until security camera footage was analyzed that police realized the same man appeared in multiple locations, always wearing a different company logo. These stories are disturbing because they show how easily trust can be exploited. The people responsible didn't rely on force. They relied on access, on routine, on the assumption that familiar things are safe. True crime reminds us that danger often hides in plain sight, woven into everyday life. And while these stories are unsettling, awareness is one of the strongest forms of protection. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told quietly. Sleep well tonight, and stay safe. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names and details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are true and documented. This story is meant to be listened to quietly and slowly. If disturbing material affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let the room grow quiet. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you come back often for these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins with a town that relied heavily on routine. People left for work at the same time each morning. Shops closed at predictable hours. Nothing ever seemed out of place. That's why it took so long for anyone to notice that something was wrong. The first disappearance was a young man who worked nights. He lived alone and was rarely seen during the day. When he failed to show up for his shift, co-workers assumed he'd overslept or quit without notice. His landlord waited nearly a month before calling police. Inside the apartment, everything was neat. No signs of struggle. No phone. No wallet. Investigators noted that the door had been locked from the outside. Over the next year, 4 more people vanished. All lived alone. All kept predictable routines. And all disappeared without witnesses. The cases were spread out enough that no immediate connection was made. Each was quietly labeled as a voluntary disappearance. The break came when a woman narrowly avoided becoming the next victim. She returned home early one evening and noticed something strange. Her door was unlocked. Inside, the lights were off, but she sensed someone had been there. A drawer was slightly open. Her bedroom window, normally locked, was unlatched. She left immediately and called police. Investigators found no intruder, but they did find something unusual. The woman's spare key, which she kept hidden outside, was gone. When asked who might know about it, she mentioned a man who had done utility work in the building months earlier. He had chatted casually with her while working, asking about her schedule, her job, and whether she lived alone. That detail caught investigators' attention. The man worked as a contractor for various services in the area. He had access to dozens of apartment buildings and homes. He knew where spare keys were commonly hidden. He knew which doors stuck and which windows didn't lock properly. Most importantly, he knew routines. When police searched his vehicle, they found notebooks filled with addresses, names, and notes like alone, night shift, and no visitors. Some entries were crossed out. Those crossed-out names belonged to missing people. A search of his rented garage revealed something far worse. Inside were personal items belonging to multiple victims, arranged carefully on shelves. Phones, wallets, keys, and photographs. Investigators realized he didn't take items for value. He took them as proof. In another disturbing case connected to this investigation, police uncovered a series of break-ins that had never been reported. Families had assumed doors left open or moved objects were accidents. But surveillance footage eventually revealed the same man entering homes while people slept. Sometimes he stayed only minutes. Sometimes hours. He never woke them. He just watched. Perhaps the most unsettling detail came from his confession. He said he preferred people who wouldn't be missed quickly. People whose absence would blend into the noise of everyday life. He counted on delay. On assumptions. On silence. Another case linked to this story involves a woman who began noticing someone following her during her morning walks. Always at a distance. Always wearing different clothes. She changed her route, but the feeling persisted. One morning, she turned suddenly and saw him standing still, staring at her. She reported it. That report may have saved her life. His description matched the suspect already under investigation. The final revelation shocked even seasoned detectives. The man had lived an entirely normal life. He had friends. He attended community events. He was described as polite and reliable. No one suspected him. Not because he was clever, but because he was familiar. These crimes didn't happen in abandoned places or dark alleys. They happened in homes. In neighborhoods. In spaces people believed were safe. The danger wasn't loud or chaotic. It was quiet. Patient. Observant. True crime teaches us that awareness matters. That discomfort has meaning. And that routine, while comforting, can also be predictable. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to gently remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names and identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are true and drawn from documented investigations. This is meant to be listened to slowly and calmly. If this type of content is not for you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let the outside world fade for a while. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a small city where public transportation was the backbone of daily life. Thousands of people rode the same buses and trains every day, often recognizing faces without ever learning names. One of those familiar faces belonged to a man who had been driving a late-night bus route for years. He was known as quiet, reliable, and punctual. Riders trusted him without thinking twice. The first disappearance connected to this story involved a young woman who worked evenings. She was last seen boarding the bus just after midnight. Security cameras showed her stepping on, scanning her pass, and taking a seat near the back. She never exited at her stop. Her phone last pinged near the bus depot, then went silent. At the time, police believed she may have left voluntarily. Months later, another rider vanished. Then another. Each disappearance occurred late at night, always on the same route, always when the bus was nearly empty. Because public transportation footage is often overwritten quickly, crucial evidence was lost before anyone realized there was a pattern. The connection finally emerged when a transit supervisor noticed irregularities in the vehicle logs. The bus in question showed unexplained delays, short gaps where the GPS signal dropped, always in the same industrial area near the edge of the city. When confronted, the driver blamed technical issues. No one questioned him further. A breakthrough came when a passenger narrowly escaped. A man riding the bus noticed the driver pulling off route and slowing near an abandoned lot. Sensing something was wrong, he exited the bus early and reported the incident. Investigators reviewed what little footage remained and identified the driver as the common link. A search of a nearby warehouse revealed personal items belonging to multiple missing passengers. Bags, jackets, identification cards. Everything was stored carefully. Investigators realized the driver used his position to isolate victims, choosing times when no one would notice a missing rider. Another case tied to this investigation involved a woman who reported being followed after exiting the same bus line weeks earlier. She described a man in a transit uniform who walked behind her for several blocks before turning away. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. In hindsight, it became chilling. As the investigation deepened, detectives uncovered complaints that had been dismissed for years. Riders had reported feeling uncomfortable, noticing the bus doors remained closed longer than necessary, or that the driver watched them through the mirror. Each report alone seemed insignificant. Together, they painted a disturbing picture. Perhaps the most unsettling detail came from the driver's routine. He mimized passenger habits. Who rode alone? Who fell asleep? Who wore headphones and wouldn't hear the doors open? He relied on exhaustion and trust. In another city connected to this case, police uncovered a similar pattern involving a train attendant who had access to restricted areas and maintenance tunnels. Although the crimes were never proven to be linked, investigators noted the same theme: authority, familiarity, and access. What makes this story disturbing is how ordinary it all seemed. Public transportation is something millions rely on every day. It's routine, predictable, and that predictability was used against unsuspecting people. True crime often shows us that danger doesn't look like a threat. Sometimes it looks like a uniform, a schedule, a service we depend on. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told quietly and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay safe. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to gently remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names and identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations and court records. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let the room grow still. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you come back often for these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins with a place people rarely think about after leaving it, a parking garage. The kind attached to offices, hospitals, and shopping centers. Bright during the day, empty and echoing at night. In one mid-sized city, a series of disappearances began quietly, spaced far enough apart that no immediate connection was made. The first person vanished after finishing a late shift at a medical office. Security footage showed her walking into the garage, keys in hand, phone pressed to her ear. She never reached her car. Her vehicle remained parked where she'd left it. Police initially believed she may have met someone she knew. Months later, a college student disappeared under similar circumstances. Then a retail worker. Then an older man who volunteered at a community center. Different ages. Different backgrounds. The only shared detail was where they were last seen. The parking garage sat between several buildings and was used by hundreds of people each day. It had security cameras, but many of them hadn't worked properly in years. Lighting was inconsistent. Blind spots were common. People moved through it quickly, heads down, focused on leaving. A breakthrough came when a woman reported something unsettling. While walking to her car late one evening, she noticed a man standing between two vehicles, pretending to be on his phone. As she passed, he followed closely behind her. When she turned suddenly, he stopped. She ran back toward the elevator and called security. The man disappeared into the stairwell. Investigators reviewed footage and noticed the same man appeared in older recordings near the times other victims had vanished. He wore different clothes each time. Sometimes a reflective vest. Sometimes a jacket with a company logo. He looked like he belonged there. After weeks of surveillance, police identified him as a contract worker who performed overnight maintenance in multiple garages across the city. He had keys, access codes, a reason to be present at all hours. Co-workers described him as quiet and dependable. When his residence was searched, investigators found items belonging to multiple missing people. Keys, wallets, identification cards, carefully stored. He had kept notes about which garages had cameras that worked, which stairwells were rarely used, and which days were busiest. Another disturbing detail emerged when police reviewed years of ignored reports. People had complained about feeling watched. About someone standing too close in elevators. About footsteps behind them in empty garages. Each report had been dismissed as coincidence or anxiety. In a separate but eerily similar case uncovered during the investigation, police learned of a man who worked as a night janitor in office buildings. Employees had reported finding desks disturbed, chairs moved slightly, personal items missing and later returned. When he was arrested, he admitted to entering offices after hours and watching people through interior windows before eventually escalating his behavior. He had gone unnoticed for years because he was expected to be there. Another connected case involved a hotel where guests began reporting strange encounters. Someone knocking softly on doors late at night, claiming to be staff. A man in a uniform would ask to check a thermostat or smoke detector. Most guests refused. Some didn't. When a missing person case was tied back to the hotel, investigators realized the uniforms had been stolen and reused to gain access. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of these cases is how ordinary the environments were. Parking garages, offices, hotels, places people pass through without thinking. Places designed for convenience, not safety. One survivor later told investigators that what saved her was hesitation. She felt uncomfortable and slowed down instead of rushing to her car. That pause made the man lose interest. He relied on momentum, on people moving automatically, not paying attention. When the garage worker was finally arrested, investigators discovered he had committed crimes in multiple cities. Each time, he stayed just long enough to learn the environment, then moved on. He chose places where people were distracted, tired, and eager to leave. During interrogation, he admitted that he preferred transitional spaces. Not homes. Not crowded streets. Places in between. Places where people assumed they were still safe, but were already alone. True crime often reveals that danger doesn't always come from strangers in obvious places. Sometimes it waits in the spaces we don't linger in long enough to notice. The spaces we pass through every day. These stories are disturbing not just because of what happened, but because of how easily it all blended into routine. The perpetrators didn't break in. They didn't force entry. They were already allowed to be there. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to gently remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, witness statements, and court records. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, settle in. Let the world outside fade away. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every one. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins with a stretch of highway that locals avoided after dark. Not because it was dangerous in an obvious way, but because it felt wrong. The road cut through long miles of forest and farmland, with few lights and even fewer buildings. People used it every day, but at night, it became quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The first person disappeared after their car broke down along that road. A passing driver reported seeing the vehicle pulled onto the shoulder with its hazard lights on. By morning, the car was still there, but the driver was gone. Police assumed they had accepted a ride and left the area voluntarily. Weeks later, another car was found abandoned only a few miles away. Then another. Each time, the scene was the same. No signs of a struggle. Doors closed. Personal belongings still inside. The disappearances were spread out over months, and because the victims came from different towns, the cases weren't immediately connected. The pattern began to emerge when a tow truck operator mentioned something strange. He recalled seeing the same pickup truck parked nearby during 2 separate recoveries. The driver never approached. He just sat there with his headlights off, watching. Investigators began reviewing old traffic footage and found the pickup appearing again and again near the times vehicles were abandoned. It belonged to a man who lived less than 10 minutes from the highway. He worked as a roadside assistance contractor and frequently responded to breakdowns in that area. He had tools, a uniform, and a reason to stop. When questioned, He explained that he often pulled over to help stranded drivers. He said it was part of being a decent person. Many people remembered him. Some even described him as kind. A search of his property revealed something far more disturbing. Hidden behind a locked shed were personal items belonging to multiple missing people. Shoes, jackets, phones wrapped carefully in plastic. Each item was labeled with a date and a location. Investigators realized he didn't see the victims as people, but as moments in time. As police dug deeper, they uncovered reports that had been dismissed for years. Drivers who said a man had offered help but made them uncomfortable. People who noticed their cars were touched or moved when they returned from rest stops. Each report alone seemed minor. Together, they told a story of escalation. Another case tied into the investigation involved a woman who survived an encounter on that same highway. Her car overheated late at night. The pickup pulled over within minutes. The man offered to drive her to a gas station. Something in his tone made her hesitate. Instead, she pretended to call a friend and said help was already on the way. The man left immediately. She later learned how close she had come. In a separate but related discovery, police linked the suspect to a series of disappearances near rest areas across state lines. He traveled frequently for work. Each disappearance lined up with his schedule. He chose places where people were already vulnerable, already stressed, already eager to accept help. Perhaps the most unsettling detail came from his interview with investigators. He said he never forced anyone. He waited for them to trust him. He relied on exhaustion, isolation, and the belief that help is always safe. Another connected case uncovered during the investigation involved a man who worked overnight at a train station. He assisted travelers, answered questions, and helped carry luggage. Several passengers reported missing bags or delayed arrivals, but nothing serious, until a missing person case traced back to the station. Surveillance footage showed the employee guiding the victim into a restricted area under the guise of helping them. In both cases, the common thread was access paired with authority. A uniform, a role, a reason to be trusted. These crimes didn't happen in dark alleys or abandoned buildings. They happened in moments of vulnerability, on roadsides, in transit spaces, in the brief pauses between destinations. One investigator later described the danger as quiet and patient. It didn't chase. It waited. It depended on routine and assumption, on the idea that bad things happen somewhere else. True crime reminds us that safety isn't just about where we are, but how aware we remain. That listening to discomfort can matter more than politeness. And that help should never come at the cost of instinct. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware.